Good evening. Good to see so many people here tonight. It's great. We're pulling in a few extra chairs from the kitchen, and that's always good news. Thank you, thank you, thank you. I'm Ginny Peterson, and I am on a member of the Washburn Heritage Association. And this is one of, Washburn's lucky because we have not only the Heritage Association, but we also have the Washburn Area Historical Society. And we have a lot of the same goals, but we don't always work on them together. But this one we always have. This is the 12th year of our Tony Woyak History Festivals, and that we've also always kind of co-sponsored and planned them together. If you're interested in reading more about how the Tony Woyak happens, and if you're not already a member of the Washburn Heritage Association, our president, Mary, who probably poured you some lemonade, has got a few copies of our recent newsletter, and one of the featured articles is about the Tony Woyak Festival and how it came into being. Or just talk to me later and I'll tell you all about it. So tonight I'd like to welcome you, and this is where I usually say, to the beautiful Harborview Event Center. And it is a beautiful event center, but we had some disappointing news at about 3 o'clock this afternoon. Their bartender backed out and they couldn't find a replacement. And I said, people are going to be disappointed. Even if you're not a big drinker, it's a Tony Woyak was always meant, these festivals were always meant to be more than just history lecture. It was meant to be a community kind of event, and I think if those of you who've been doing this for a lot of years have felt that way about it. People like to hang out long after the speaker is done and discuss stories of their own from Washburn's past. So in 2 weeks, we've got another Tony Woyak event coming, and the event person said she's for sure going to have that bartender here, so we hope so. And so please come back. The Tony Woyaks will occur every 2 weeks, and the next one will be Darren Miller, who is the director at the Bayfield Fish Hatchery. And he is also somewhat of a history buff. So he's doing a presentation not just about fish, but on the hatchery itself and how it came into being. And I expect that'll be a wonderful presentation as well. But tonight, we'd like to welcome local resident Al House and his wife Therese. And Al and Therese moved here about 35 years ago, if I'm doing the math right, 36. It was in 1987, and they bought some property on Houghton Point. Lucky them. But in those days, there was nothing there at all. They built a kind of log cabin out there, and for the first few years, Al told me that their nearest neighbor was a quarter mile in either direction. So they were... What's that?
3/4.
3/4 of a mile. Oh my gosh, that's even further, isn't it? All right. So anyway, they were out there, but they fell in love with the property and its history. And Al has a degree in history from the University of Minnesota, and so they started looking into what made that place so special. And they discovered, of course, as many of us know, that there are a lot of things that make it special. And so he's going to be talking about that tonight. I'll just briefly say also that one of the reasons that it's accessible to us is that it's been put into a conservancy. And Al, at that time, was the president of the Bayview Town Board. I said president, but it's chairman, isn't it? Chairman of the town board.
I was just actually a member of the town board. Don Janacek was the supervisor.
Oh, okay. All right. But many of us know Don Janacek, knew Don well. And so that town board, when they discovered the wonderful stories, and they wanted that property preserved for everyone. And so Al was able to write some grants. They did a lot of work, and they got I'm just curious, how many people have been to Houghton Point, now to the end of, let's see, look at that. And I think I was out there before there was an actual trail there, but it's so wonderful now to be able to get out there and enjoy that. And all the upgrades have been paid for with grants, and that Al has been able to secure as well. So we've got a lot to thank Al for, besides doing his talk tonight. So as I welcome him, please express your thanks and with your applause. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much. And just a couple of things. One, the improvements after I was off the board, no longer town chair, my successors and our successors on the town board has continued to do great work as far as improving the access and taking care of Houghton Falls Nature Preserve. So Charlie Ray and Don Jenacek again now, and the board members deserve some credit for that. I think it's kind of neat that this is a Tony Woliak festival, because the last time I saw Tony was walking in Houghton Falls Nature Preserve, and he was walking with his ever-present video camera and his Welsh Corgi, and trying to figure out how to make another film about the Houghton Falls Nature Preserve. So I kind of link Tony with the Nature Preserve as well. When Teresa and I originally found a hand-painted sign next to a couple dirt ruts in 1987 and followed it and almost took out the oil pan of our station wagon to see what was on the end of it, we had no idea that it would start a love affair with this area and with Houghton Point. And we stumbled into it, we built a log cabin. 12 years later, we finally became full-time residents, and have never looked back and have no regrets that it worked out the way it did. Now, getting to the presentation, first thing is, there's a lot of holes in it, okay? There's a lot of information about Houghton Falls Nature Preserve, or Houghton Falls in general, that still needs to be found, discovered. And as you'll see, there's some gaps as we go along. I wish I could say we had the whole story, but the whole story still needs to be written by probably someone other than I. As far as Houghton Point, what's in a name? Well, if you're Ojibwe, it's Nieshibikan, which is a Ojibwe name for Houghton Point. If you're looking at a map, in a French map of the early 1700s, it's Point Les Spires Quamagant. And then when the English and then the Americans finally took over the governance of it, they named it after Douglas Houghton. Douglas Houghton, if you're not aware of, was a geologist who discovered the riches of Lake Superior area, both the Upper Peninsula, Wisconsin, and the Mesabi iron mines of northern Minnesota. And his work did lead to the country's first mining boom. Now, geological history of Houghton Point, you could do in a whole nother lecture. In essence, like the rest of the Bayfield Peninsula, it's part of a gigantic river mouth of the predecessor to the Great Lakes. And over a period of time, it led to sediment deposits, and more sediment deposits led to greater pressure, which squeezed it down into sandstone and then brownstone. And then the glaciers came through and scraped off the top, leaving the brownstone, which is how we basically got the brownstone cliffs north of Washburn going up to Houghton Point. Now, human prehistory is another lecture as well. There's a wealth of anecdotal evidence that Houghton Point was populated and used by many successive waves of native peoples. Tend to be rather circumspect about some of the specific information because, to tell you the truth, we're somewhat leery of people doing amateur and illegal archaeological digs. But suffice it to say that there has been implements from the copper culture people, which date back about 5,000 years, have been found in the Houghton Point area. If you're not aware, the copper culture people, they were identified here from about at least 5,000 BC until about 1,000 before Common Era. And they actually mined pure copper out of different veins that have been pushed around by the glaciers and deposited in different areas. And at that time, they were the only people in the world using pure copper implements. And this was about the same time that the Egyptian pyramids were being built. So we know that Houghton Point has had people around it and in it since then. And again, just a reminder that it is against the law to search for private property, search private property and a nature preserve for artifacts. There have been some applications for archaeological digs in the nature preserve, but that's under the auspices of the Wisconsin Historical Society, and as far as I know, they haven't authorized any as of yet. Okay, again, the copper culture, 3,000 to 1,000 before Common Era, throughout northern Wisconsin, the UP, Michigan, North Shore, Minnesota, Canadian Shore. The Keweenaw deposits were very popular. They also mined the Outer World deposits. And they've been spread through this area. As a matter of fact, some of the copper culture artifacts and ornaments have been found as far away as Central America. So there obviously was some active trade going on. After the copper culture, there was a continuous stream of people. The Woodland Indians were the next ones, around 300 before Common Era. They are the effigy mound builders, and here and there has been some evidence of some mounds built in this area, not so much as further south, but certainly they were in this area as well. They were succeeded by the Mississippian, help me with this one, Mississippian culture predecessors to the Oneota. The Oneota, in turn, were the parent culture to the Eastern Sioux, the Ho-Chunk, and the Menominee. And they all came through, spent various times and periods in the area around Washburn and Ashland. Finally, you had the next ones would be the Sioux. And they were around 1400 Common Era to early 1700 Common Era. And they were throughout the upper third of Wisconsin. At the time, the eastern Lakota were woodland dwellers and extended to include most of Minnesota. And early legends from the Ojibwe attribute a possible settlement of Sioux at the Houghton Point area. Now, during that time, for Native Americans, there was a time of upheaval between 1500 to 1700s. There's a lot of wars and forced migrations going on, predominantly because of the Iroquois Wars in the eastern United States. That drove a lot of the various tribal bands into the Midwest, including the Sioux, the Fox, the Potawatomi, the Mascoutin, Kickapoo, Ottawa, Miami, Huron, all came into Wisconsin from their homelands in Ontario, in Canada, New York, Ohio, and Michigan. During this time, too, a number of other tribes migrated to the region, and the earliest were the Ojibwa. They came to Lake Superior from the eastern Great Lakes about 1500 Common Era. So it was kind of a mixture and a lot of migrations and passing through. It wasn't like someone owned it. They used it, they'd be here, and they may succeed and move somewhere else. Now the Ojibwa, their history dates them to the Chwam-Gambé area in the early 1500s. And at this time, they were suffering repeatedly from raids and attacks on the Sioux, whom were also in northern Wisconsin. That could be another lecture in itself because, interestingly enough, the Ojibwa actually changed and reorientated their whole society to face the threat of the Sioux and were able to successfully repel them and drive them out. But in the 1600s as well, many were located in the Sault Ste. Marie area. They relocated again to Chwam-Gambé at the end of 1670s due to pressure from the Iroquois advance. And interestingly enough, had a temporary alliance with the Sioux at this time, which degenerated later. And about that time too, the European explorations began. And this gentleman is Pierre Radisson, who was the, as you will know, the first European to visit Wisconsin, and he came via Chequamegon Bay. And fortunately, his fourth journey, which is when he did that, he wrote it in English, his journal. So that made things a little bit easier. And in the fourth voyage of discovery, he and Grossier, his partner, found Huron and Ottawa in the Chequamegon Bay area as refugees from the onslaught of the Iroquois. If I remember correctly, I believe the Ojibwe at that time were on Madeline Island as well. So, anyway, Radisson's entering Chequamegon Bay, in his own words, talked about, we pulled into a strait for that point that was very wide, which is a cape very much elevated like the pyramids, a point that should be very fit and advantageous to the building of a fort, as we did the following spring. Now, as you're probably aware, Radisson spent his first winter in Chequamegon Bay in a encampment down by Fish Creek. What a lot of people are not aware of is after going from there to the upper reaches of the Mississippi and northern Minnesota to trade with the Sioux, they came back through the following year and they actually did an encampment, established an encampment on Houghton Point. And at the time when they did, they made a fort, and they found 20 cottages, Native American settlements, possibly Huron, in that area. They intended to stay the whole winter, but they discovered that the Ottawa had built a fort on Chequamegon Point, where Long Island Light is now. It's about 1.75 miles from Houghton Point. And where was their fort? Well, the Ottawas was there, and somewhere in this area was Radisson and Grossier. Now keep in mind, it wasn't a big fort because they only had 2 of them. But they did have Native Americans, members of the different various tribes that had helped them ferry their furs and things that they had traded for to that point. Now this is just, I took this picture from our point, which is Houghton Point, and that's Chequamegon Point as seen from Houghton Point. So as you can see, it's not real far, you know. So there's he was fairly nervous because he felt the Ottawa, well, they had a bit of a reputation as liberating things from traders, and he was afraid they were going to lose the furs that they had traded with the Sioux for. He did not trust them, so, and they were burdened down by furs and booty and had no Native American helpers for transport at that time. So they decided to risk leaving early over the ice to avoid the Ottawa. Unfortunately, they ran into bad ice, soft. He injured his back and leg, pulling the heavily laden sled. Grossier left him and sought help among the Native Americans, and they rescued Radisson and apparently returned to Houghton Point for 3 weeks to recover before he was able to continue his voyage, his trip of discovery. That's Houghton Point, probably pretty much like at the time of year that he left. And this point, we get the historical gap. I looked, and maybe somebody better than I can find it. I have been unable to find any information about the Houghton Point area between 1670 and the 1830s. So we know it's there. We know people passed through it. We know fur traders were there. There was people on the point. There was Native American bands on the point, French, British, American presence, but nothing recorded about Houghton Point by that or any other name. So it's one of those historical holes that have to be filled. But in the 1840s, started to get some interest. A gentleman by the name of Samuel Vaughan purchased large tracts from current-day Memorial Park to Houghton Point and proceeds to advertise in Eastern newspapers the new city of McClelland, Wisconsin, trying to attract purchasers to resell to. The city had prospective streets laid out and was touted as new metropolis of commerce. Well, the financial panic of 1857 brought the speculation to an end. Interestingly enough, this was quite common throughout that time, is that people would buy large tracts of land throughout the western United States and try and entice people to move there. And shortly thereafter, surveyor named Brunschweiler actually did prospective town of Houghton, which, interestingly enough, Frederick Prentice was part of one of the people that was interested in establishing it. And so they actually laid it out, and they did even more surveys of it. But this is a little bit about the G.L. Brunschweiler on the left. He talks about the different lot sizes. And on the right, you have Prentice, Tucker, and Maddox, who are partners, talking about what a fantastic place it was and why you should throw your money at them so you can have a piece of property there. I don't think they did too well, to tell you the truth. Although Prentice did better a little later on, as you'll see. Now, this was Houghton Point, 1855. It was, there were a few people, a few places, but pretty much empty. And keep in mind, at this time, it didn't look quite like it does now because the logging was already starting to go on. And this was the city of Houghton. And again, this is facing, if you go down here, you go to Washburn. If you go down here, you go towards Bodine's place. And as you can see, they have a heck of a lot of lots already platted out, but no buyers for them. And then Houghton Falls, the lagoon was actually all their plan to dredge it out and make a little harbor out of it, along with boat slips along either side for commerce. Didn't happen, unfortunately it didn't. But then in the 1850s also, and this is documented by a fellow by the name of Guy Burnham, who was a reporter for the Ashland Daily Press in the 1920s. He did a lot of historical work. And he talked about a sawmill, first called the Maddox Mill, and later operated by Samuel Vaughan, that operated on the east side of Houghton Falls, mainly processing trees being cut nearby. Guy Burnham, 70 years later, relates a story of the owner's daughter being saved by a doctor who came over from Ashland after she fell into the mill blade. Actually saved her life. The sawmill was dismantled by the 1880s, and there's no trace of it, but pretty much if you, for all reports, if you go between the area that's railroad grade and down to the, along the north side of the lagoon on the path, it was somewhere in that general area. And then Houghton Point in the 1850s, 1870s was, had lost its trees. It was, like everywhere else, the white pine was cut down and sent east to build the nation cities and everything else. And pictures from the 1870s and 1880s show a markedly different Houghton Point than what we see today. This is the entrance to the lagoon right around the corner here. So that's like when you walk down today, down the nature preserve, you end up on this rock ledge there, and you look across and you have the lagoon there, and then this is the other side. And during that time also, there's a mystery of the infant's grave. As best they can tell, because it's written in Swedish, the infant died at 13 months old, was buried in 1873, and Guy Burnham reads the writing and believes it's the daughter of a Swedish immigrant to the area. And he noted even then vandalism with the stone. Somebody had taken a shotgun and shot at it, and it was also broken to pieces, and as you can see, they had been rebuilt. Well, interestingly enough, that infant's grave was there for 117 years. And when we built our cabin, it was still there. You could walk down and see it. It disappeared in the early 1990s during construction of a house nearby. The disappearance was reported by a contractor who had avoided disturbing it. And I wrote, someday hopefully it'll be returned. Well, after the first time I gave this talk back in about 2014, an individual came forward with fragments of his gravestone that were found in an outbuilding of a deceased person. So sometimes these talks do some good. Now this is another grave that's back there. I won't tell you where, but it's a mystery grave. It's actually on property that Teresa and I own. And I did a rubbing of it a number of years ago and was able to ascertain that the date on it was 1914. And there's a steel plate buried down about maybe 6 inches. So Do not know who lived there. It's close to an old foundation, a site of old outbuildings, including an old two-holer outhouse. They must have been rich, they had two holes. And it was upright until 10 years ago when it naturally collapsed over. So there is a little history and people who have, are in permanent repose on Houghton Point. Also, I might add that the copper culture, they bury their dead within sight of Lake Superior. And so there's any number of mounds in that area that might be graves. We just don't know, and best thing to do is just respect them. Now, in the 1880s to 1900s, Houghton Point was in the middle of Chewamgon Bay happenings. It was the age of brownstone. You had Houghton Point had two very large quarries, and there were other quarries up further north and on Basswood Island as well. And it was, like I said, the age of brownstone. This is actually a sketch of the Houghton Point quarry that was done around 1904 or so, I believe. And it was boom time for the new town of Houghton, because Houghton finally did develop as a town. 40 cities in 10 states had buildings built from Houghton Point brownstone, including Washburn. Houghton Harbor was developed and actually acted as the place that most of the brownstone was shipped. As you can see, we had the railroad going there by that time, and all sorts of structures, and you have there the quarry. And in the nature of that time, when they sketched a picture, usually they compressed things to fit everything in they possibly could. This is much more spread out than this, but it gives you an idea. Now, interestingly enough, another one from that time shows Houghton Harbor, but it's a mirror image. Okay, so what happened? Well, if you ever have Lake Superior, you know this is probably the most accurate one, because a northeast wind comes bombing in. This would be offer far more protection than the other way. But I think what probably happened is somebody at a newspaper reversed the plate and didn't notice it. And so therefore, all of a sudden, it's in perpetuity that it looks like that. Okay, the Houghton Village residents, these were actually rooming houses for some of the people who worked on the quarries. And it was a quite prosperous village, I believe. And then you had the harbor right down from it, we call the brownstone, waiting to be shipped off on boats. And then you had the Chicago Northwestern train, which went through there, which is the route to Bayfield. That started about this time as well. Station in Houghton Village, this is what it looked like then. And this is where I'm going to take a little break and give a credit to Paul Johnson and the Bayview History Committee people and the work that they had done as far as restoring. This is the paymaster's office for the quarry, and then right next to it you have the depot. But if you get a chance to go down to Bayview Town Park, take a look at it. It's worthwhile. It's a genuine piece of history there as far as what this area was like back in the early 1900s. And again, there's a depot there back then, and this is the depot now. So they did a great job and kept local history alive, so I just give kudos to them. A lot of credit to those people. So come visit. If you haven't seen it, come down to Bayview Park and see where the Houghton depot got relocated to. Okay, Houghton Point area around 1906 is starting to be broken up a bit. You go into detail here, and W.A. Sprague owns a lot of this area here. This is his property right there, I think, and he crosses over into there. And there's a few other homesteads, but Mr. Sprague has done well for himself, and he bought a very, very large area of it. And meanwhile, Ashland is trying to, the Ashland Daily Press, like all other newspapers, is really trying to promote people who come into this area. So this is some of the optimistic stories, optimistic writings that they have. Big Stone Quarry, a great brownstone industry established at Houghton Point
what Frederick Prentice has accomplished during the season. Although he has different enterprises on his hands, the one which is now occupying the greater part of his time is the already famous Prentice Brownstone Quarry, located at Houghton Point, 3 miles north of Washburn on the Omaha Road. So, and then this is some of the talks from people that moved there. This is the Jammer Frostman, which there's a famous name for this area, Frostman. And he says, I came to Houghton with mother and Ole in September of 1890. Father was in Houghton in 1889. It was a humming town in summer with a population of some 300 people working at 3 quarries. Smith, Babcock, Hartley, and Bill Jesse from the Twin Cities. These were sandstone quarries, and the superintendents were Fred Goddard and Prentice. The main entrance to Houghton was the Houghton Road, now known as the Frostman Road. And again, going further along, and this is again the Jammer Frostman. Along the track north, Ole Hagen, Alec Nicholson, Krogstad, Sen Severson, that's a Scandinavian name. Blacksmith shop, Houghton Depot with ticket shop, platform, telegraph, post office, and then on Smith Street, below the boarding house of W.H. Smith at one time, a log landing place on West Side, going north was Smith Seniors and Barn, the Blue Schoolhouse, then Severson, Finstead, Erickson Brothers, Partner Supply, Holberg, Kiesel, and Conductor Huddleston. All the men worked in the sandstone quarries during the summer and logging camps in the winter. And this is a map that was recollected by Carl Frostman in 1973. This roughly shows where all the individuals' houses were along the railroad. Interesting enough, too, is that during this time, there's a lot of things happening on the water. And a couple shipwrecks of note have happened on Houghton Point. In 1887, the small size wheeler steamer tug, City of Ashland, caught fire, burned to the waterline, and sank off Houghton Point. And I remember when he came up here first and bought, Bruce Bowers, may rest in peace, told me how he had been looking for the walking beam steam engines for 15 years. Bruce was quite the avid diver. And I don't think they ever found them. And Bruce was kind enough to contribute this picture of the City of Ashland. It's the only known picture there is of it. A little later, a little more serious thing happened. And that was the freighter Samuel Mitchell in 1908 runs aground off Houghton Point. That was bad enough, but it was towing a barge called the Chickamauga. And that barge crashed into the Samuel Mitchell, and according to the Daily Press, the shipwreck caused a hole large enough to drive a team of horses through in the side of the Samuel Mitchell. Its oar was lighted off, and tugs brought it back to Ashland where it was repaired. Now, after that happened, they put a warning light on the tip of Houghton Point, and actually the concrete slab is on our property now. And that was there till about the mid-1950s when it was replaced by a navigation buoy. Now what's missing, and I've looked hard, I went to Coast Guard records, Coast Guard books on navigation lines, can't find any pictures of it. However, Mrs. Sorley brought this to me and let me make a copy of it. It's the only known picture of it, right there.
Oh.
That's the Sorley kids. Glenn, I think, is my age or a shade older. That's him right there. But this was taken sometime in the 1950s. So as you can see, it was about 5 feet by 5 feet, and it had a metal lattice with one top, and then they had the propane-powered light up here. And that got replaced by the buoy. Now the buoy itself is kind of interesting because back in those days they didn't have GPS and Lorient, but they had to figure out how to put it because underwater it goes from 65 feet to about 8 feet in the space of maybe 150 feet. So it's almost like a cliff, a sheer cliff. So what they did is, you can't see it in this picture unfortunately, but it's pretty weathered, but right here there's 2 white stripes. And what they do is the Coast Guard would come up, they take a due east heading off those stripes and back up, until they saw these stripes past the, if you go that flat platform at the bottom of Houghton Falls Nature Preserve, you look across, you see those two stripes. They back it out until they could see those stripes, then they were triangulated and knew exactly where to drop the buoy. So, it took me a while to figure that out and verify it. Okay, meanwhile, all this is going on, down the shore has become a tourist mecca. Like I said, there's not much in the way of trees. They've been pretty much cut down. But people love this area. And as you can see, there's a boat there. A lot of people lined up for the picture. This is looking across the lagoon at the bottom. Again, that's that rock ledge. For instance, that would be just up above the stripes, and that's where they would have been looking to trying to figure out where to drop the buoy. In Houghton Point in 1882, I got a better slide that actually reads this. Houghton Point is located just across the bay from Ashland, may be easily reached by the bay steamers or over the Omaha Railway. It's a lovely spot and is visited by numerous picnic parties during the summer months. There are many delightful glens near this point, and sketches of some of the most interesting will be given in later issues. And this one talks about Lover's Glen. Lover's Glen is about 3 miles, which is now known as Echo Hills. It's about 3 miles north of Washburn. There's a little stream that wends its way along a deep and cavernous ravine, discharging its waters into Chewamga Bay, just south of Houghton Point. If we should follow the stream about 50 rods above where it is crossed by the Omaha, the delightful retreat represented by the engraving opposite would be found in all its primitive grandeur. And that's this one, if you recognize. Only back then, in 1882, they had a log bridge across the hills. But see this little rock there? Okay, that's what it looks like today. Same rock. So things haven't changed that much. And again, Lover's Glen today. Now, back then, the advertisers and promoters were trying to get people in. They talked about, should the large hotel that is talked of be built at Houghton Point? The great number of little glens nearby with their miniature falls and cascades would make this one of the popular summer resorts in the country. Now, this is the really stretch. It is entirely free from mosquitoes, as I can say with all candor. Having been there 1 month for each of the last 2 years, I think the month was December, by the way, and never having seen one yet. He should have been on a walk with our dog and I the other day. I think I gave blood, 6 quarts of blood. Mosquitoes are bad this year, folks. Okay, but it was the excursion central, and it was a very popular area. If people didn't take the boats across, which included the S.A. Burke, the plowboy, a little bit better picture of the plowboy. You might have seen this picture. We found this one and put it on the board on the trail, this particular picture. The fashion and the Daisy were also going there. And where are they going? They're going to Houghton Point, which the Ashland Daily Press did the sketch of. Now you look at the sketch, and looks like a cross between Niagara Falls and Wisconsin Dells. And this was very common. They were there to encourage people to move here. So they made it. They took liberties and made it look maybe a little more dramatic. And already had put the hotel there, which never was built, and than it really was. So consider that fantasy. That's the reality. Okay. This is actually a pavilion that was put back in 1904. This was the dock where he dropped off at. And they actually had dances at the pavilion. So it was a popular area, and people would go there by boat, or else they'd walk up, they'd be dropped off by a train, walk down to it, and at the end of the day, be picked up to go back to Ashland and Washburn. It's called Broward Park back in those days. This is actually a postcard that was by Captain Henry Broward. Had some writing in it about it. Very similar though. That's the lagoon. Right up there across from where the path is now was the pavilion, and then the dock. That's where the dock is. Site is what it looks like today. Yep. And then in 1910, the Washburn Times talked about the Washburn City Council declines to purchase the so-called Houghton Park for the sum of $1,200 due to lack of funds. It took another 100 years, but it did eventually become a park. And it's funny because those exactly the early 1900s, W.A. and Hattie Sprague had developed and built a very palatial house and estate. You might recognize it.
Oh, yes.
Holly had dinner there at one time. The Whittles Walk is gone, but the rest of it is there and makes a heck of a good fish fry on Friday night. Now, with Mr. Sprague, every morning he would be taken by his driver and go into his bank. He was the president of the bank. The Sprague farm was big. It stretched all the way from current good time to Houghton Falls. It was clear-cut pasture land. It was not farmland, or it was not forest land. And from the Whittle Walk on the 3rd floor, you could actually see Superior on 3 different sides. They had a flock of peacocks, and they flew down to the falls every day, and they raised 300 head of beef per year.
Wow.
This is probably a later picture, probably around the 1920s of where it's been developed a little bit more. They've got some outbuildings. No, at this point is another historical hole. You know, and this is one that probably could be researched better. And that is, what are the families that settled some of the areas of Houghton Point? The Cutie family farm starts in 1932, we know that. What did they build? Where did they go? This is, on the right, is a 20 by 30 foot rock foundation that happens to be on our back lot. And it was someone's house. It wasn't Cutie's. There was somebody else lived there. We have no idea who. And that, again, is very close to the grave site that I showed earlier. But by 1910, the brownstone quarries are shutting down. Houghton's still in operation with a school, though, and a post office. And it finds another thing, tourism. Houghton Point, the 1925 World Log Rolling Championships, and the old Houghton quarry filled with water now. And it's a new life for the brownstone quarries. And as a matter of fact, it has World Log Rolling Championships in 1925, 1926, 27, 28, and 29. And it looked like a good time and a popular time. And meanwhile, Houghton School continues to thrive. And this picture was taken approximately 1937. And I'm going to take a moment here and read the people who are in this picture, because they are the modern pioneers of Houghton Point. They and their families. And their families are very, very well known. Let's see. Teacher was Lorraine Anderson. And then there's numbers there, so I'm not going to read them, but this is the people on those. Pearl Harvey, Ray Niskanen, Ruth Henry, or Nardine, Rodney Sarver, Robert Frostman, Clifford Bodine, Arthur Cutie, Esther Vinell, Phyllis Cutie, James Buelager, and Betty Tudor, Ralph Bodine, Donald Frostman, Glenn Bodine, Kenneth Howell, Janet Cutie, Ruth Wiskinen, Ruth Berlager, Betty Frostman, Patrice Harvey, Constance Berlager, Guy Frostman, Norman Nicholson, Charlotte Howell, Richard Cutie, Sue Schindler, and William Schindler. So obviously, a lot of those names are familiar to this day. And Houghton Falls during this time continued to be a popular destination year-round in the 1930s. People would come back and go see it. And meanwhile, also, as the town of Houghton kind of faded, Bodine's Fisheries made the move in 1905 and came over and established a fishery just north of Houghton that continues at Bayfield to this day. Later, family developed both Bodine's Resort and Brownstone Bowl
And unfortunately, one of their original boathouses was destroyed in a storm about 4 years ago. And that's sad, but anyway, it's just so neat to have heritage like this and families like this that have a heritage and they're still here. Now, time and erosion, the point itself, that's me standing on the point waving. And just to give you an idea of what erosion has done over the years. By the way, where I'm standing, there's actually no National Oceanic Atmospheric Administration has put a survey marker right there that's embedded into the point. But that's what it looked like in the 1960s. And it had a tree. You might have seen this. It was a popular postcard back in the day. And then this is what it looked like in 1905 in a German postcard. As you can see, all that dirt is rolled away. These two rocks are exactly the same. That's how you can tell that it's the same place. But you know, other than that, there's been a lot of changes. In Houghton Point, 1962, this is a Sunday Picture Journal where they used it as a background for promoting tours in this area. And it continued to be a popular destination to get away, swim, or explore. In the 1950s, the Grants, owners of Club Lido and the old Sprague House, buy much of the Houghton Point shoreline. According to Bob Cuddy, whose father was a Boy Scout at the time, the idea was to donate it to the local Boy Scout troop as a Boy Scout camp. For some reason, the plan didn't work out. So under the Grants' ownership, Houghton Falls becomes a de facto park for the enjoyment of many visitors over the years. And they allowed a family friend to summer there in the trailer and kind of watch over it. And he's famous in his own right around here, Tom Blake. And Tom would park his trailer and keep an eye on it and just make sure that nothing was damaged on the park. And Tom left his epitaph with the permission of the Grants. You go down on the north side and on a slanted rock, it says, "Nature equals God, T. Blake, 1964. And by the way, that cabin that's on the north side, if you've ever seen it walking the railroad grade, that used to be down on the south side. But when they tore the tracks up in the 1970s, the Grants actually had a flatbed trailer truck move it to the north side of the falls. And that's where it is now. You can see it from the railroad grade if you ever walk down it. Well, Houghton Point today, in 2009, a partnership between the town of Bayview, Bayfield Regional Conservancy, the state of Wisconsin, and the National Oceanic Atmospheric Administration, and the Trust for Public Land, were able to come together and obtain funding and agreements to establish Houghton Falls Nature Preserve. And there you have Don Janacek, who was town chair at the time, and myself and Bob Bodine were town supervisors. And today, Houghton Point is a mix of residences and natural areas, parts of which now would be preserved forever. That's the lagoon right there. And since the founding of Houghton Point, it's been a favorite destination for every schoolboy and girl, I think, in Washburn. Dozens of people have told me how much it meant for them in their youth, including my son. And interestingly enough, the first time I walked in the nature preserve by myself after we had found it was about maybe 6 days later. And I ran into 3 people. The man was 92, and the women were 88 and 86. And they had walked all the way down, and were walking on the way back up. And I asked them if they wanted me to come down the railroad grade and give them a lift. They said, no, we want to do this. And they remembered it from when they were going to school in Washburn, and they played hooky and go down there. Yeah. And they said, we never forgot it, and when we heard it was you could go there again, we had to see it. So that really touched me. But Houghton Point, you know, it's linked to Washburn and Swamptown Bay's history, and it always will be. And it continues to be Washburn's place to have nature break. Parts have changed a little over the centuries, really. And the next time you hike the trail, stop and listen, hear the voices.
of the people who experienced and enjoyed it before us for the past 5,000 years. And thank you to the following for pictures and anecdotes. Obviously, many people for it. Bodine, Frost and Families, Paul Johnson, Bob Cutie, Beta Bodine, Betty Ferris, Bruce Bowers, many more. And special thank you to the audience for listening to me. Thank you. I'll take any questions, but I'll warn you right now, I perspired a bit and my right hearing aid shorted out. So speak loudly, please. Yes.
The first European guy, what was his name, Radisson or something?
Dear Radisson.
Yeah, where was he from in Europe? Do you know? You know?
I'm French, I'm sure.
Okay, it's French, okay.
Yeah.
I was just curious.
Because he wrote 7 voyages of Radisson, and 3 of them were in English and 4 were in French. And they were basically dependent on whoever financed the expedition. That's the choice of language. Yes?
You mentioned a cabin in the last part of this.
The cabin?
And you said it was still there?
Yeah,
Was
yeah.
that
It's actually on
Was
the
that a
north
spray
side.
cabin? I just don't remember it.
I'm sorry?
Was that a spray cabin?
No, I don't know if it was sprayed or not. I do know it was pointed out to me by Cheryl Graham. She's the one that told me it moved.
I can go.
Oh, you know?
Sharon.
Sherry! Good to see you. I hope I did a good job.
Well, you did it.
Okay.
I'm very pleased. It was wonderful. The cabin that he's talking about was my mother, and she wanted a cabin, but she wasn't one to spend a lot of money. She really wasn't. Clearly didn't spend money she didn't have to. And she went out on Tommy Tennessee and talked to some farmer and got a chicken coop. Loaded it on the flatbed, brought it down to Houghton Falls. We just took all the stuff out of it and cleaned it, and my brother and dad and everybody made it into a cabin. And we had it for 25, 30 years. And then a person down the way wanted to buy it. And Daddy said, well, if you've got $1, you would have it, as long as you move it. And that's where it ended up, on the north side. And the person that bought it, I can't remember his name. He put a bathroom in it, and a kitchen, and the whole thing. And we had a kitchen, but we used the space that was originally there, where he added on to it and made it look more rustic. And so that's the story of the cabin.
Does somebody still use it now?
Well, they use it as a guest house. The people that bought the original built a home.
Eagleson still have it.
Do they still have
Oh.
it?
Yeah, you still have it. It's fixed up really cute.
Yes, and
It's on their
they,
land.
Yes.
and they made a guest house out of it.
Okay, cool. Very nice.
Well, thank you, and thank you for coming.
You're welcome.
Now, this is the lady that could tell you all about Houghton.
I have another question. Were the Indians driven away? I'm just curious.
Okay,
With all the settlers coming.
No, actually, you have to go into details, and exploitation of Native Americans isn't our proudest time. But at the same time, a lot of it was wars between like the Sioux and the Ojibwe. The Ojibwe actually, the Sioux hated all Europeans. The Ojibwe traded with Europeans, so they were able to get muskets and steel and things. And the Ojibwe ended up driving out the Lakota in the battles in the 1700s. There's a big battle of the Brule, and another one in Garrison, Minnesota, where they drove the Sioux out of the area. So after that, it was more, I think, subjugation and treaties that were pretty much pushed into giving up a lot of land and things. So. Yes.
The old quarry, is there still a
Yes, there is. Yes, there is. It's on private property. Modines, I believe, own the property. And, yeah, it's still there. There's a couple of them, as a matter of fact.
I have another question, if I may. When those folks long ago in the when they bought this big piece of land for a town, who were they buying the land from?
You know, the land was, oh, thank you. The land was generally to promote development. What they did is the railroad was deeded every other 40-acre parcel. And then the railroad could sell it to whoever they wanted. And that was used to fund the construction of the railroad. And then it also promoted the purchase of the other 40-acre lots. Did anybody just come in and buy everything? Probably in some cases that happened back in the land speculation times of the 1840s. But a lot of those people went bankrupt, so the land would go up for sale again and again and again, because the speculation is like that. Most speculation doesn't work, but they're looking to hit the jackpot. Yes, sir.
So Al, behind, it's probably on Monine's property, the quarry that is off the lake shore, it's back in the woods. It's obviously still there. When I was a kid, we'd go back there and play, and there were still a couple of houses and buildings back there. I'm curious.
They're still there.
Are they still
Yeah.
there?
There's
We're in
our
rough
house.
shape 40 years
Our
ago.
house has an old foundation, like I said. There's an old foundation, a big hole in the ground. I didn't even know it was a foundation until I was, first year I got it, I said, oh, I'm gonna go deer hunting back there. I walk in, I'm sitting down in this big depression. All of a sudden I look around and realize all these stones have been stacked, you know. I realized that I'm in the middle of somebody's basement. Yeah, it's, they're still there, and they're falling apart, and who knows, probably another 50 years they'll disappear. So.
Is the Houghton School still there?
Is what still there?
Is the Houghton School?
School.
Houghton School, I believe the building is still there. It's on private property though. So, and there's still a lot of those structures were repurposed, and the people's houses and whatnot. So, it's not a place you can really do a tour of, which is why it's nice that they do park. Kind of set that up down the way. So. Yes, ma'am.
Okay, I went to Houghton, Michigan, okay?
Yep.
And now there's Houghton Point, but I know they have, it's called Copperhead there, am I correct? I don't know.
Copper what?
Copperhead?
Yeah.
Yeah, so what's, how did they get Houghton Point and then Houghton, Michigan? That's what I wanted to know, because
Well,
it's like, okay, yeah.
I'd say it was probably an arbitrary choice by somebody who wanted to make people think there was copper over here in order to drive settlement. It might have been a person who was an admirer of Douglas Houghton that just decided, oh, we're going to name Houghton Point after him.
Yeah,
You know?
indeed, yeah.
So, I don't really know. I can only speculate. Yes, sir.
So Guy Byrne had an article, or a passage in his book that you read, that talked about a battle between the Ojibwe and the Sioux, where
Yep.
the Little Sioux River and the Big Sioux River.
Yep.
Did you ever find any correlating facts or evidence that actually occurred? Because that was probably the battle that finally forced the Sioux up the Big
Yep.
Peninsula.
Yeah, that and the Brule, the Battle of the Brule was a big one. No, I haven't, and I think it will be marvelous for someone to do the research on it. I almost think that if there's a Ojibwe oral history keeper, talk to them, and because it seems to me that that's an important part of their heritage too, and they would probably find that of interest to try and help.
John has the next lecture.
There you go. Oh, by the way, speaking of next lectures,
Notice how Don volunteered.
I would like to do a plug for Darren Miller and the hatchery talk. He's a good friend of mine. He's a really good man and a darn good fisherman. But also, he's found some things that I'm not going to spill the beans, except they're incredibly exciting, some of the materials he's found. And I'm looking forward to attending and listening to it. So, Well, thank you so much. I really enjoyed it.